So we load up Meshroom and we're going to put our images here. There's only 8 of them. It shouldn't take too long. Now they recommend if you have use NVIDIA for Meshroom because it uses the CUDA cores. But anyway, the feature extraction, if you turn on advanced options or attributes in here, you can uncheck that. Also the depth map, I'm going to do 1, and the texturing I'm not doing EXR, I'm going to just do JPEG, and I'll let it do 16K textures and downscale to 8K. The mesh type will be OBJ. I can also, while I am here, I can add a mesh post-processing mesh decimate and a mesh post-processing resampling. And then what I'll do is drag mesh to mesh, and then mesh to input mesh, and then in the attributes for the decimate, I'll do like 0.15, I guess, and maybe 0.15 for the resampling. That'll give us 2 models. It'll give us a low poly model and a high poly model. One will have a texture and the other will not. See, when this thing gets done, it's pretty high polygon, and it goes to the texturing node last. But here we're diverting it to also do a decimate and resample. Sometimes you can make this loop back into texturing, and have it process that, but it's doesn't always work. So you got to save the project and hit start. Now I have the image viewer turned off because I don't use it. I really don't. In fact, I don't even like to have this open. I like to have my 3D view, pretty good view there. Now typically when you start this, ideally all these will turn green, and about around where it gets to prepare dent scene, you'll see a bunch of balls in here. There'll be like a representation of the mesh that's to come. See, here we go. So as you can see, this will be the mesh. You can see based on them pictures it determined where the cameras were. Those are the cameras. And these are the balls that make up the mesh. Now this is a good point if you are in the middle of making something and you realize, man, that don't look right. Then it probably don't. It probably won't. I mean, you'll know when you see one that doesn't look right. You'll be like, oh no, that ain't right. And if you go back over to here and they're not right, you'll probably see there's like some slashes going through the cameras and some of the pictures, which mean they couldn't use them for whatever reason. But I just did a few pictures so that it wouldn't take too long and I wouldn't have to stop the video and edit the video. And now I shared about 97 pictures of a nice looking rock a couple weeks ago in the community tab. If you want to send them to Meshroom, you got all day in the world to wait. It did take a while. It took over an hour. Took quite a while. Now when this thing gets through texturing, you won't see a texture pop up in here. But when it's green, you can double click on it and it will show you the image, the textured model in here. You just have to hide the structure from motion so that you can see the textured version. You can also double click on the mesh decimate or resampling and or the meshing for that matter. You could look at all of these and see what it did. Like the meshing, you would just see the mesh, the high poly mesh. But I usually don't like look at all these. I made enough things that I'm pretty good idea what's going to look like what. Now this is the newer one that was released this previous July of 2023. I think it's a little bit, for me anyway, it seems a little bit slower than the 2021 Meshroom, but I have no idea what's going on under the hood. It could be, I did make a render of the exact same thing in both Meshrooms, 2021, 2023, and I couldn't tell a difference as far as quality. I didn't time them. Mucho sueño en la mañana. Tired here. A little tired. That's the impatience yawn. Get that same yawn if I'm at a library. 'Cause I don't like to read. Reading makes me sleepy. But yeah, this will be done in a second. And the texturing, when that's finished, you can go to the attributes. And when the mesh resample's finished, you can go to its attributes. Scroll down, and each one, if you scroll down, each one has a mesh. Location. Unless you remember all them numbers. I don't remember all that. What I'll do is copy this to my clipboard. And then I'll just hit Control C. You can't right click and get a thing, so you just have to Control C. And I'll load up Blender and I'll import in that mesh. But wait until it gets done texturing, of course. And you may say, hopefully you ain't saying that. Hopefully I ain't putting you to sleep. But you have you saying, why are you rendering two different meshes? You rendering a low poly and a high poly. Why not just render the low poly and texture it? Well, you could sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't work. But if you want to really bake in the normals from the high poly mesh so that the low poly mesh looks like the high poly mesh, then you'll need to do a bake in Blender. Now I can show you both ways to do this so that you don't want to bake. I can show you how to just reduce the poly count of this thing significantly and make a collision mesh with a lower poly version, and how to make that show up in the level. Let's look at the resampled version. Well, let's look at the first mesh first. I'll double click on it. It takes it a minute. I probably shouldn't have done it while it's still texturing. It's already using a lot of resources. So this is the high poly mesh. If we look at the wireframe, I mean, you can see it's pretty. Let's see if I can get it closer. It's pretty detailed. This is just a little area of the asphalt that was cracked. I thought, what if I get that really good and make a model out of it and then blow it up? But anyway, that's what that is. And if we look at the resampled version, I'll hide the meshing version, and you can see that it's resampled. It's a lower polygon. It's still not significantly low. It's a lot lower than that one. But you can see what the difference is, and most of the texturing's done. I'll load it in. Someone had mentioned in one of my videos, well, the thing don't even texture. Right? Yeah, it does. You just gotta double click on it if you want to see it in here. and it takes a bit for it to load depending on how many polygons it is. It could take a bit. So you can see we're still waiting. Alright. Oh yeah, that's textured view. So now you may be saying, oh, I see why you want to do stuff like that. It looks pretty damn good. Yes, it does look pretty good. It's a lot of polygons, though. So like I said, once texturing's done, we can import in that mesh in the Blender. We'll delete this stuff. We don't need it. We'll import the mesh. And paste that location and import it in. Now I don't rotate these. I leave them where they are, because if I do bake, I need to import the other one in so it's in the exact same place, so that when I rotate them, they'll rotate together and not off axis, and because you want one right on top of the other when you bake, but not necessarily crooked like that. Yeah, but anyway, so let's look at the poly count. Let's see what we got here. We got 2,807,000 polys. Now I can say, now if I do a 0.01 ratio, we'll still be at like 28,000 polys, I think. 0.01. And this can take a bit too. So. Yeah, 28,000. And you might say, well, that don't look bad. Well, it's okay. I mean, maybe it's okay for you. Maybe it's good. Maybe it'll work. I can see the difference. If I look at it, I can tell that it is all messed up, in fact. And it looks pretty bad. But, that's up to you. What do you think? I don't think anybody'd want to use that like that. It just don't look good like that. But I said I'd show you how to do it. So if you want to use that like it is, then fine, we'll use it. I will go ahead and rotate this thing around. We'll just set origin, geometry to origin. We're waiting on something. What are we waiting on, man? Oh, I didn't apply that. So I guess like all that's still in memory limbo. I took it long enough to decimate it. Because I guess it kind of has to have an undo available if you're gonna, not apply it. I don't know. I'm just talking out my ass. I have no idea really. Alright, so damn, this thing is slow. Don't even ask what the system specs are. Don't even ask. I don't want anybody to be discouraged or say, no, I'm not messing with that Meshroom. Because I did this on an i7 7700K on a GTX 1080. It just takes a little longer, that's all. It just takes a little longer, but it still works. Depending on, you can't go crazy and scan your whole neighborhood, of course. So let's import in a car from the game. This is just for scale. On the desktop, I have a car that I always use. It's here. And then I just decide, well, what do I want this to be in the game? How big? Now, I can scale it in the game if I wanted to. It just depends on what, it depends on what I'm trying to make, really. Well, we'll just leave it like it is. I don't know why these. I don't know where these keep coming from unless they're in that damn car. When I import that car in, I keep meaning to pay attention to that and I forget. So let's rename this. So this will be road underscore, and you got to put a letter A, a little lowercase a after the underscore, and put 500. And then we'll duplicate it. Now, the duplicate, we'll name it 250. I will hide the 500, and then the 250 will decimate that even farther. So we'll try to do 0.1. That should take it to about 2,800 polys. Now you can see that clearly. It looks terrible. You can sometimes do planar decimate and tell it to preserve the material in UVs. You can hold shift to double select those. And as you move this up, it'll do a different kind of decimate that is a little different than the collapse, which you may find works okay for you. And it does start losing some of its, after a certain point. But that looks a little better. I usually don't like to use that one because it does weird stuff to the mesh. And if you try to drive on that collision mesh like that, it's not great. But anyway, we'll apply it. This will be our low poly mesh. And we will probably fix that right there. It's bugging me. I'm looking at it. It's bugging me. I'll just move that down. That's better than it was anyway. Alright, so these are our two LODs. Now we'll make a collision mesh. Now watch this, is pretty easy to do. Make a mesh plane, scale it up a bit, and then go to edit mode, go to edge, subdivide, and do about, you can probably get about 25 subdivisions. Then get back out of edit mode and say in object mode, hit this thing and say shrink wrap, and then point to the rock there. Now if I hide the rocks, you can see that that mesh is more or less just following the rock there. Maybe I should do the other one. See if it makes a difference. We'll go with that one. I mean, probably it was exactly the same. Now you can move this around to kind of try to get it. There's also a few different ones you can. Sometimes I'll use project, and I'll tell it to do negative and positive, and sometimes I'll use that instead. Just all depends. I'll probably use that. Alright, we'll apply it. I could apply the other one too, by the way. Now this is going to get renamed. This is going to be called COLMESH-1. That'll be our collision mesh. Now you want to get these where you want them to be when they spawn. So if you want them to be, kind of like that, that's fine. Just select everything and say apply all transforms. Now we're going to add 2 empty plane axes. Actually, we'll add 3. The first one we'll name little letters BB underscore auto billboard 25. What that'll make is when these things are only 25 pixels small, whatever in size, it'll just be a two-dimensional sprite representing this object. There's another one that you can use called null detail, which basically says when it gets to, like, say, I don't know, 10 pixels in size, it just doesn't draw it anymore. If you're interested in the null detail, I can show you what that one looks like. I just have to find where I put my notes. My notes. Where is it at? I got it in one of these. I knew it was. I don't think it's that one. There you go. Send this one in. There it is. Null detail 10. I couldn't remember if there was an underscore. So anyway, you can have that in there also. So I'll go ahead and just add it. So if you want to add it, you can. We'll add another empty plane axis, and this will be called null detail 10. Now we need two more, or these other two, I'm sorry, we need to rename them. One start 01 and the other is base 00. And the only way I can really explain what these really are doing, in a sense that may make some sense, is think about a folder on the desktop, right? You got a new folder, and that folder is called collection, for example. Well, let's rename it. Now this has nothing to do with what we're actually making now. This is just to show you like an illustration. And then inside a collection, you got another folder called base 00. And then you have the other one, start 01. Start 01 will be inside of base 00. So it's just basically like that. They're basically folder structures, and then the exported meshes go into there, and then the other ones go into base. It's just basically a folder structure. That's what it is. So you hold shift and you left click, drag and drop. Hold shift, left click. It's just like moving something on your desktop, except you're holding shift. And you're going to drop start into base. Then you can open up base. And just leave all these closed. I don't want to confuse you by saying, this is that and that is, just, it don't matter. Take the two roads, move them into start, put the collision mesh into start. So we got three things in start. Now the other two things stay in base 00. Maybe they're not in there when you moved them about and around and whatnot. Just take them both, hold shift, put them in the base. So this is how it should look. Oh, we gotta rename that texture. Let's just call the texture Road 1. That's it. That's everything you need to make this thing load in the game. So let's load the game. And you can do it like this too if you want. It doesn't matter. If the game's already running, you can move those items into the level from Blender. You know, never once have I seen one of these ads and say, "Ooh, I gotta buy that." Never once. Not one time. Free roam. Let's just do. I don't really like the light in that small grid. It doesn't look right to me. Let's just. Mess with that one, I guess. So we need to go to edit mode and save the level. Unless you already got it. Or unless you've already saved it. There's not a user folder created for it yet. I mean, there's a temp folder, but we don't have to worry about that. That isn't. You ain't worried about the temp folder that's created. We need a folder in the user folder so we can make changes to the level without changing the level's install location. So, man, I just realized how I like those trees. I don't think I've ever loaded this level. So F11. Oh, I gotta turn that off. F11, save level. Now what that just did is it made in the user folder in the levels automation test track. There's not an art folder in here. You don't have to make one. You can make one. It's up to you. You don't have to. I'm just going to make a folder and call this Road 1. And that's where we're going to export our stuff from Blender. So everything, export as Kaleida. I'll go to that level in that folder. And you can name your DAE if you want to. You don't have to. It's up to you. Now we can go back to the level. I wish they'd fix that. That's so annoying. I know you seen it, didn't you? After the patch 2.7 that started, that's annoying as hell, because I alt-tab back and forth all the time from different things, and that's such a frustrating damn thing. I don't know if it's my system, if it's the game, what it is. It's annoying. Asset browser. And in the Road 1, we can drag this into the scene now. Now, if you want to, you can go to the shape editor. Now, the textures they still haven't got the textures in here fixed. So, you can force detail and look at the different ones, but this thing is about useless as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest at the moment, because you can't see any damn thing. So what you can just do is just put this thing up in the sky if you want to see the different LODs it makes. You can change the field of view so that it's kind of close, and then start to fly away, and then I say in the sky so that you can kind of see it better. But now what you see there is just the billboard, and if I get even farther away, it should disappear completely once it gets to 10 pixels. There's the one LOD. There's the other LOD. And if you didn't see the other one switch, and that meant I did a damn good job at LOD management. Now you did see that one switch. Now you can adjust that if you want that to happen farther away. You would just have to change the numbers. So I believe I have to make that one lower. That's the next closest one to the 25. So basically it'll change from 25 to the next one when the next number happens. So if it's 25 pixels big and then the next one's 250 pixels big, well, it's going to make a switch from 250 to 25 pretty abruptly. But if it goes from 25 to 50 and then 50 to 500, well, that'll be abrupt too, but at least it'll be a low poly model. They say you should do half the polys per step. Like, so if you do 500 meters away, then it's 10,000 polys. Then I said 10,000 meters away. It's, I don't forget what I said, but it's half the polys for every half distance. For good LOD management, but you don't have to follow that. See, alright, so now when that becomes 50 pixels, then it'll change to the billboard, or it's already changed to the billboard. Can't tell. Looks so good. Maybe it didn't change. I don't know. I think it did. I want to believe it did anyway. Now, since we made a proper collision mesh, you are not using visible mesh or visible mesh final. Hopefully none of you are using visible mesh. It tells you do not use visible mesh. If you look at the console, it tells you that's a performance warning. Do not use this. If it's intentional, please switch to visible mesh final. It's all there. All the warnings are there. Just you can't see them if you don't look at them. But now, you don't use this. You're using just the collision mesh because it's got its own collision mesh. That's what we made in Blender. So all you have to do is just rebuild collisions. And you can drive on your object and test it. Now, this is the lower quality version of this. This is what I said I would tell you how to do first. This is not the better quality. You have to bake to get the better quality. Or you just have to have one hell of a computer to use the 2 million poly version. I think 5 million polys is like the most I ever got in this game. And it was like a Sketchfab model that I didn't bother reducing polys or anything. I just wanted to see what it looked like in the game. But anyway, so that's how you would do that. And, you know, making something that looks like something out of these was, well, that would take more Blender work to make something kind of look like something that's, you know, not just a small piece of road. My idea of this was to do something similar to this, where, you know, the road is more or less fractured, and I would adjust this here so that that's not there. And yeah, I know what I'm gonna do with it. It's not in its final version yet. Now the baking, man, I don't even feel like baking now. Man, I'm damn exhausted. Oh man, that's a lot of stuff, ain't it? Let's just new general. let me go back to Meshroom. Alright, so if you have skipped to this part, then you want to use the better quality baking. So you take the high poly mesh from texturing and you import it into Blender just like you did, or just like we did earlier if you watched that. So we copy this to the clipboard and then we go to Blender and we import it. After we delete this stuff here, we import in the OBJ. Paste that location and import it in, and we'll leave it just where it is. We'll go back to Meshroom, we'll go to Mesh Resampling, and we will copy that to our clipboard. And inside of Blender, we will import it in. One has a texture, the other doesn't. Now to make this easier, textured mesh, I'll call this one low poly. You don't have to call it anything. I'm just doing this so it makes it easier for you to follow. Now important, I probably want to shade smooth both of them. Not so much the high poly as much as the low poly. You'll want to shade it smooth in most cases. Now select the low poly and go to edit mode. With the low poly selected, yeah, that is actually the low poly, hit A to select all, and in this particular thing we should be able to unwrap that with no problem by just UV unwrap. Don't do that with the high poly model. You'll never get Blender back. You'll have to reset, reload. Now you most likely most of the time will just do a smart UV project instead of unwrap, but since this was already kind of flat, it wasn't much to just lay it down flat, you know what I mean? It wasn't like it's an object that's complicated or anything. But in those cases, use UV smart project, and what that'll do is it'll analyze the mesh and decide how it wants to unwrap it. It doesn't matter, it's just as long as it's unwrapped in some way. Because you need to unwrap it to bake to it. So to bake, you have to go to renderer, change the render engine to cycles. The device, if you have a better GPU than CPU, then you use GPU compute. You're not going to work for Pixar, so you don't need to render 4,096 samples. You probably can get about 128. If you have an NVIDIA card, you can use OptiX for denoising, or you don't have to denoise at all. You don't have to use a GPU. You can use your CPU. It's all up to you. If you do want to use GPU, then I would suggest go to Preferences and go to System and enable the one for your system. Whichever card you have support for different ones in there. So we'll rotate both of these around at the same time, and then we'll move them to here. Let's see. They don't have to be rotated around, but yeah, it's not a bad idea. Now, once you've done this, you have the option to bake. Now we'll be baking from selected to active, which means we'll be baking from one to the other. So you'll check mark that box, open that up. Most of the time 0.1 extrusion will work. I don't really want to have to explain what that's like an offset. See, when you have a low poly and a high poly mesh, there is a little distance in between them in some places, and the extrusion takes care of that up to a certain point. max ray distance, leave that at 0 so that it can have no limit. It can just, and we'll be baking diffuse, but only the color information. So then go to the high poly, hit this little orange box, go to viewport display, change that to bounds. That way you're seeing a box representing the high poly. Makes it easier to select the box because the next thing you do is hold shift and select the low poly. Go into the shading tab, and the low poly you will add a texture image. I'm pretty confident this is going to be a good bake, so I'm going to go ahead and render 4096 by 4096. I'm going to connect color to base color. You don't have to connect it, but if you want to see what the bake looks like on there, you do. I did not tell you the name of the texture for the low poly. We'll rename it to Baked Road. Baked Road. You can rename that too. I'm just trying to do this so it makes sense, more sense. I have a baked road texture. Makes sense now? Now if you select the box and select the low poly model, the last thing you select should be what's in here. So if you select the high poly thing, it's going to show you the texture for the high poly. You don't need that. Unless you're going to bake roughness, then you'll want to connect color to roughness. Also, in the high poly texture here, you can add a input bevel and connect normal to normal. Do a radius of about 12 and samples about 4. That should make your normals have more of a beveled edge, where they have a little more definition to them. Alright, so once again, select the high poly model, hit shift, select the low poly. We've made a new, well, we're going to make it again, apparently. 4096 by 4096. Doesn't matter what you name this, you still got to save it. You can name it then. sRGB for color. And bake. Forgot how I had this. Here we go. That's how I had it. Where we get to see our baked texture all in all its glory. You look for problems. Hopefully you'd have none. I feel pretty confident this will be a good bake, so I ain't sweating it much. So that's the bake texture. And if we look at the low poly model now, you can see how that is significantly better than the earlier model that we decimated. It does not have all the triangle deficiencies in it, you know, that was everywhere. 8K may look even better. That can take a while. It like the time it takes to render from 4K to 8K, it goes up exponentially sometimes. So 4K probably be good enough. Now the image, save as, and in that same folder where we made the first one, we'll make a new folder. We'll call this Road 2. And this will be just a color map, but I don't want to put color. I'll just put diffuse, and we'll just save it as a JPEG. Quality 100%. Now that we saved it, we can now change this to linear. Go back over to here to where the baking is at and tell it to bake normals. And as long as you haven't clicked anywhere in here, they should still be selected. If you have unclicked somewhere, then select the box, then hold shift and select the low poly model. If you don't see a box, then you didn't turn the high poly model view display to bounds. I don't want to click on it and mess my bake up, but it just makes it harder to pick them both when they're both exactly on top of one another, is what I'm trying to say. Now that's inside out. It's because I didn't check my normals. I know that's inside out because it's not purple. You can, though, if you do this without having to rebake it, you can just go to image, invert image colors. Now you can do that. That'll work. See, these are all the details from that 2 million poly model that's going to make the 28,000 poly model look like a 2 million poly model. We just need to save them. Save as diffuse. Let's see. This would be normals. And make sure the color space is linear. Now the next one we'll bake. We're going to do roughness. And remember, roughness won't bake anything unless you connected the high poly model's texture to the roughness. We should get a beautiful grayscale image over here of the roughness map. Now I use the roughness map as a specular map, so image save as, you put specular, you put roughness. I'm just going to put rough. It might be either or. We can do black and white, grayscale. Now, for all you who like PBR materials, well, you can now bake ambient occlusion. Color space linear. I believe it stays on linear. I believe only the diffuse uses RGB, or if you want to use the ray trace lighting, then bake that lighting into the object, and then you would use sRGB also. So I use a Blender kit add-on so I can get HDRI lighting to light the scene for more realistic lighting, but I want the lighting to be neutral and let the game engine handle the lighting. But you can bake ray trace lighting into the object, and it does look pretty damn cool. Alright, that's our ambient occlusion. We'll save that as Ayo. 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 There's also glossy, transmission. There's a lot of different ones, but not to get into all these. I don't think there's anything that's going to bake with glossy, because I didn't set this material up in here to really be realistic. It's just whatever Meshroom made. So not to get too confusing with everything. In here we'll load back the first one that we baked. If anybody wants to see what the ray trace looked like, I guess I'll bake one. We gotta turn the viewport shading on to see, get a good idea how it's gonna look, and go to here to find HDRs, and I'll get one that kind of matches outside. Road, asphalt road. Some of these are like 17K HDRs. It'll take a while to download it. You don't have to get a 17K. If you find one that lets you have the option to download a 512K, that'll work just fine. I just picked that one because it looked good in here. But it doesn't matter. Like I said, you're not working for Pixar. You ain't got to get every pixel perfect. No one's going to look at that bake and say, I think that fella 512K HDR image instead of 8K or 17K. Because it sure looks like shit. Nah, no one's going to say that. They ain't going to say it at all, so. We're still waiting on updating lights. That's why I don't like downloading these big ass HDRs. They take a long time. There's a lot of GPU memory too being used, I reckon. See, these ones in the beginning, all these first few in this batch, they're all high quality, really high quality. System is out of GPU host memory. See, that kind of shit. That kind of shit there, I tell you. Like I said, scroll over far enough and you'll get to the other HDRs that give you the option to load a lower 512 background. I don't know that I'm going to get my GPU memory back once the damn thing runs out of memory. I think he's messed up pretty much. You pretty much messed up there. Yeah, I think. There we go. It didn't look like it was going to make it at first now, did it? I can rotate the light so you can see how the light is actually lighting this thing. So you see it is ray trace lighting. The shadows and everything are pretty realistic. And you know, like if this was in the grass or in the shade or hell inside a bathroom, the lighting would match the scene. Let's see, let's find one that's pretty different. Alright, so if you saw the road outside at this time of the day in this green field, what would it look like? That's what it would look like inside of this room here. So you can see how the lighting affects how it looks. If you wanted to bake that, well, you could. What you would do is you would, in the bake tab, you could just tell it to diffuse and do the direct and indirect lighting. I have to reselect my stuff here. Pick the box, hold shift, pick the low poly model. Make sure this is selected. If it is not, then it don't know where to bake to. And bake. And what we'll get is that lighting information with that color map in here. can also do combined, but that'll also bake in other things too. You know, sometimes one don't work and the other works, and vice versa. But if you use combined, that's fine too. Alright, now we save that one. Save as. We'll just put RT. Oh, no, that was the one that's ray traced. Now you don't have to redo the roughness and all that for all the, you know, just that's fine. We did enough. In fact, I'm going to tell you after. Let's save our Blender file. Let's save it in that level so that everything's there. You don't have to do that. I'm just in case something crashes. I don't want to do all this again. So in layout, and it doesn't matter what renderer that you got now on at this point. It makes no difference. You can change it back if you want to. Change it back to Eevee. It's fine. We'll delete the high poly model so that we just got the low poly model. And you can change that if you want to name it something else. Road 2, for example. I always got in the habit of only using lowercase when I make texture names. That way I never have to question if I used an uppercase or not. And it matters if you use upper or lower. I mean, it's fine if you use upper. You just got to remember if you used an uppercase or lowercase. So this will be road 2. Now I thought I'll put the A500 and just ignoring the name here. I don't remember what I named the first one. But now I'm going to tell you a time that you can go back in time in this video and watch how to add the empties and do the log management. But I've already did all that. It's the exact same thing at this point to do that. There's no point in doing that. All I'm going to do now is just export this as it is into the game. Now, a couple things to explain too about doing it this way. So you see there's no empties, but that's fine. The game will load it like that. I may need to change that though. Let's see. Let's see here. Now if you've added a new folder, then you will want to refresh directory. Road 2. And in here, we drag it into here. Oh man, look at that shit. You know, it's a good thing this error happened, because you'll also wonder, why does my texture look like that? Well, what you forgot to do is in Blender, you forgot to go to overlays and check your face orientation. This shows you the normals, and in this case they're inside out. The blue side is what you want. So to flip them, you gotta go to edit mode, hit A to select all the red ones, and mesh, normals, flip. Now mesh planes that are not solid objects, that are not they won't eat cars, but you'll go through them. I'm going to re-export and show you in the game. See? Now it's the back side that looks like that. You can always tell when normals are flipped. For one, the damn texture is going to be super dark really dark. I mean, it's probably gonna look like this or worse. And you know it didn't look like that in Blender, so you know that's not right. And two, the collisions won't work. Now, I mentioned collisions because I did this one different. This is the way other people do it, where you just export the object, go to inspector, pick this, and tell this to be visible mesh final. Now let me show you what the difference is, why you don't want to do that with a high poly mesh. This is the low poly version of it. I'm sorry, they're both low poly. One, I just made a even lower poly collision mesh to go with it. That's if you rewound the video to that part, and that is the part that'll explain that. This I did not. If I go to ground model debug, I gotta find it. I don't always use it, so I can't remember where it's at. Where is it at? It is right there. And then I tell the ground model debug to show me the static. If I move where I move the cursor, you will see the normals. Now, what do you think is killing my performance to 13 frames a second? Out of all this stuff here, what do you think is killing my performance? Now, I don't even have to drive on this to tell you what it's going to do to performance. I can just move this debugger over and you can see the frame rate tank. And it's because you're trying to drive on a high, well, it's not necessarily high. It is 28,000 damn polys. That's a lot. You don't need that damn many. Look at the tree, for example. Yeah, that probably ain't got about 30 polys. So, even my low poly model that I made for this, or I subdivided that mesh plane 25 times, that probably was excessive for something like this. And you gotta think, well, surely there's probably a good reason to have a high poly collision mesh. Only thing I can think is if you're making a decal, let's turn that off. If you're making a decal, for example, and you want to tell it to be over objects, which is the mesh, it's going to do a lot better on the high poly collision mesh as far as being represented correctly than it will the low poly. Now, this is a terrible example. That does not illustrate my point at all. But normally, that's what I mean. The decal will stick to the low poly mesh, and well, it'll stick to the high poly mesh too. If you're using the high poly as a collision mesh, the accuracy is what I'm trying to point out. It's more accurate on a high poly. But like I said, unless you're using that decal and going over objects, you know, so what kind of decal would you want to go over an object with? Well, maybe skid marks, for example. You know, that might be one example where you would want to drive over an object with something. But unless you, like I said, unless you really are really nitpicking, you know, there's really no advantage to using a high poly collision mesh. Use a low poly when possible. And let me think, is there anything else? Oh yeah, Almost forgot to finish the damn texture. Because we are only looking at the color map. We are not looking at the normals or anything else yet. So we'll select our object. Let's get up here closer. Now in the material editor with our object selected, we can select our normal map. Remember we saved all these earlier. And in the specular map, we'll put the roughness. Lighting, anastrophic filtering. Don't forget that one. Detail map we'll skip. Detail normal map, we'll change this to 1:1. We don't want to tile our. We're going to basically recycle that, use it again. On PBR, you can just tell it to be more or less for that, but in the 1.0, you can't tell it how much of the first normal map you want, but you can tell it the second normal map how much more you want to show to it. So you can see, if we look close, that now this low poly model is now starting to show the high poly model information. This can best be seen when the light is changing in the scene. And you can see where the normals are a lot better and how they come into play as far as that detail. So if I turn that off, I turn that one off, you can see makes quite the difference. Now we are zoomed up very, very close. Oh yeah, don't forget you got the roughness, a slider. We can slide around. You can also, what I'll do sometimes, I'll just reuse like diffuse. I'll put it in the reflectivity map. I'll put this down to like 0.1. Go down to advanced. Turn this to level. And you can go back up to here and adjust the slider. Now that'll make it so that it somewhat reflects the level. You just want a hint of reflection. You don't want a lot if you do use this. It's just to give it a little, a little different look. I'll change that specular. See what that one looks like. Oh yeah, no, that ain't gonna work. Alright. Oh, you want to see the ray traced one? Almost forgot. It looks exactly the same, don't it? It looks exactly the same. That's not always the case, but in this case, it certainly is. I may have not damn saved the right one. That's possible too, but that's how I would swap it out. Now you want to see the PBR version. We'll switch to PBR. And in this particular case, you got to add the roughness map and the roughness, ambient occlusion and the ambient occlusion. Let's see. A lot of times you have to tweak the colors a bit to get what it is that you want. Metallic. forgot which one's them. Is it black or white that's metallic? I got a note here. Black is shiny. No, hold on. I know I got it. I wrote it down. White is metallic. So, if I put the ale map and the metal map, you may say, why is that red? Well, grayscale, proper grayscale shows red in here. You may say, I like that. I like that already. I like that a lot. I mean, it's debatable. Let's try the roughness map in there instead. Oh no, that ain't going. Now, baking a metallic map, it's not quite that simple. You pretty much have to bake what's actually metallic-y of the texture. That's just like an artistic interpretation, really. What do you think looks metallic on the road? You know, I think of metallic, them little white flakes that you see, you know, the light bouncing off of, which I think that pretty much is what that looks like. But, you know, everybody's got different opinions on what looks right and what don't look right. That's pretty much it, man. I can't think of nothing else really to add or you know, I think that's pretty much it. Like I said, I think it covered it all. If you have any questions, let me know. PBR is more realistic lighting. Materials look more realistic, but not necessarily the best all the time. Sometimes non-PBR looks better. I always felt PBR materials look better on like metals and things with metals, and not so much on stuff like rocks, but that's only because I'm limited in my skills at making texture PBR textures. So here you can see both side by side, and you know, so all beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Whatever you think looks better. Now that's not the best PBR for a road. I didn't take these pictures with the best camera. They're taken with an iPhone. So, of course, the model looks better the better the camera. You got a new iPhone, it probably look a hell of a lot better. I got an old iPhone 8 Plus, so things I make with Meshroom do not look as good as. But I think it's pretty clear, though, the first version does look terrible as far as the way it handled the UV maps. Remember, this was the one we baked. I mean, we did not bake, I'm sorry. This is the one we just decimated. We didn't bake it. And this is the one that we baked. It's a little shiny, isn't it? He's a wee bit shiny. Probably not the best thing for metallic. But anyway, that's it. I'll be here all day, damn, trying to mess with this thing. I think that's pretty much it. I probably said that 20 times, but really, I think that is it for this video.